When Alejandro Cruz arrived in Miami, he had nothing, no papers, no family, no name. But while others chased gold chains and headlines, Alejandro stayed invisible, built power in silence. Every favor, every debt, every move, he turned nothing into a network, and from nothing became a king. When Alejandro Cruz stepped off the bus in Miami, no one paid him any mind, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The city pulsed with life around him, neon lights flickering across cracked sidewalks, voices in English, Spanish, Creole blending into a chaotic rhythm. He had no ID, no green card, and no family waiting at the station, but he had something else, an intellect honed by survival, and a cold willingness to do whatever it took to rise. He found his first hustle 2 hours after arrival, a 3-card Monte table run by a teenager who didn't realize the man watching him wasn't a tourist. Alejandro played dumb, lost $10 and returned the next day with a better setup and smoother hands. Within a week, the kid was working for him. By day, he bussed tables and listened, really listened, to the conversations of street soldiers, delivery boys, bartenders, and drug runners. By night, he pulled short cons, rigging card games, fixing bets, even forging fake lotto tickets to scam tourists. Every scam taught him more. He learned how depression made people predictable, how pride was the most valuable pressure point, and how fear didn't require violence, only the right words. He didn't crave attention. While other hustlers flashed gold chains and gaudy sneakers, Alejandro stayed invisible. He wore plain clothes, carried no weapon, and kept his voice soft and his eyes alert. But behind the scenes, he made moves. When a local cruise enforcer landed in jail, Alejandro quietly paid the bail, with interest. When a rival corner team planned a retaliation hit, Alejandro fed them just enough information to redirect the violence elsewhere. He earned his first real power, not through bloodshed, but through mediation. 2 mid-level gangs were set to clash over overlapping corners. Alejandro sat them down in the back of a closed laundromat, translated what needed, and walked them into a compromise. They didn't trust each other, but they trusted him. Trust became his currency. He never took more than he gave, at least not up front. Instead, he built a web of favors. He kept meticulous records and a cheap leather notebook, names, debts, leverage. No one ever saw it. No one dared ask. Within a year, his name became a whisper in backrooms and alleys. Cruz can help. Cruz can fix it. Cruz doesn't forget. And when Miami's 2 major mafia families, the Lombardos and the Riviera Syndicate, began tearing each other apart in a bloody turf war, Alejandro didn't flinch. He'd seen it coming for years, the botched drug shipments, the ego-driven leadership, the careless violence. He knew who would win. More importantly, he knew who would survive. And he was already waiting in the vacuum they would leave behind. The war between the Lombardos and the Riviera Syndicate left Miami in smoldering fragments, gunfights, car bombs, and disappearances. The city had become a chessboard of corpses and shattered alliances. But while others scrambled for what was left, Alejandro Cruz moved with precision. He didn't walk into the power vacuum. He designed it. Alejandro sent messages through whispers, through trusted couriers, through favors owed. You want protection? Come to me. You want purpose? I'll give you one. He didn't shout, he didn't beg. And in a world of broken loyalties and sudden deaths, that quiet promise was a lifeline. Some were cautious, others skeptical, but most were desperate. And desperation, Alejandro knew, was more powerful than any gun. Within weeks, he'd stitched together a new kind of empire. Not a pyramid, but a network. Cruz, once loyal to the old mafia families, now reported to a ghost they'd never met. Alejandro's structure was decentralized, efficient, and above all, disciplined. His lieutenants wore suits, not gang colors. They ran shipping companies on paper and smuggled weapons in crates of electronics. They managed real estate, ran logistics hubs, opened shell nonprofits. The streets whispered about a ghost king running the city. No one ever saw him, but every decision led back to him. At the center of it all was Roberto Salazar, a former street baller who'd once broken a man's spine in a parking lot brawl. Roberto was Alejandro's right-hand man, loyal, strategic, merciless when needed. He didn't ask why, he just made sure orders were followed. Alejandro's power wasn't built on brute force, it was built on systems. He bought influence like most men bought coffee, a precinct captain here, a customs official there. When he needed a judge to lose a file, it disappeared. When a zoning board tried to block one of his fronts, a quiet donation changed their minds. But even a ghost king had to cast shadows when needed. When a runner skimmed money from a narcotics deal, his fingers were shattered, one by one, and sent back to his cruise in a velvet pouch. When a mid-tier capo tried to deflect to a rival out-of-state syndicate, his body was found swinging from an overpass, with his mouth sewn shut and a coin in each eye. Not a word was spoken publicly, but the message was received across the city. Respect became fear, fear became myth, and Alejandro became untouchable. Until he wasn't. Late one night, a coded message reached him through a burner channel usually reserved for emergencies. It was a single line: "Your past has arrived." Alejandro stared at it, the glow from his laptop screen flickering against the dim walls of his study. He exhaled slowly, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He had built his kingdom from nothing, but ghosts from nothingness had a way of returning. Every empire, no matter how silent its rise, has a flaw. Alejandro Cruz had spent years eliminating his, cutting liabilities, controlling narratives, turning enemies into allies. But the one weakness he never accounted for wasn't a rival or a rival bullet. It was trust. It started with a mistake, a routine exchange. $500,000 in cash from a container of modified rifles was handled personally by Roberto Salazar, Alejandro's closest ally. That alone was unusual. Roberto never got his hands dirty anymore, but that night he insisted that someone was watching. The FBI had been running silent operations in South Florida for years, and they finally caught a scent. Unmarked vans parked blocks away, hidden cameras embedded in a nearby lamppost, thermal drones in the clouds above. The deal was big, and Roberto walked right into it. He was arrested without a scene, no headlines, no resistance, just a pair of quiet agents with binders and a single offer. Not prison, not 30 years in a cage, but freedom, immunity, a new life in Montana or Oregon or wherever ghosts went to hide. All he had to do was flip on Alejandro Cruz. Roberto held out at first. Loyalty had always been his brand, but loyalty, he realized, meant less when you were staring down a future where your name was only ever spoken in prison mess halls. He had thought about his sister, the one he hadn't seen in years. He thought about all the blood he spilled for a man who never bled himself. And slowly, he began to speak. Not all at once, just enough. A drop here, a bank account there, GPS data, stash house keys, burner phone passcodes. He leaked Alejandro's life, drip by drip, letting the feds build a map so precise could have been drawn by Alejandro himself. And Alejandro, too busy playing kingmaker, didn't see it. He was overseeing expansion, negotiating a shipping deal with arms brokers in the Balkans, silencing a local journalist who had written too closely about port anomalies, and laying groundwork for a Caribbean corridor. His network was global now, too big to fall, he thought. But then, it did. The takedown came like a precision strike. One morning, Alejandro stepped out of his high-rise condo overlooking Biscayne Bay, freshly shaved, black dress shirt tucked tight, ready to meet a senator's aide, and found himself face first on the pavement. Flashing lights, dozens of agents, a voice shouting, "Cruz, you're under arrest." He didn't struggle. As they cuffed him, escorted him past stunned pedestrians, Alejandro's eyes scanned the perimeter. He already knew what had happened. The frozen accounts, the missing lieutenants, the silence on secure channels. Then, he saw him. Across the street behind the tinted window of a black SUV, Roberto Salazar sat. No expression, just watching. Their eyes met for a brief, eternal second, and Alejandro didn't blink. He didn't shout or curse. He just nodded. Once. Slow. Cold. Understood. The kingdom he built had collapsed in a night, and the man who brought it down had been standing beside him the whole time. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and antiseptic. Alejandro Cruz, once the silent monarch of Miami's criminal underworld, now sat, wrist chained, his slick back hair growing wild at the edges. He didn't flinch when they read him the charges: wire fraud, racketeering, arms trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder. The list went on like a dirge. Roberto's testimony was the final nail, delivered with surgical precision, devoid of drama. He recounted dates, drop-offs, the names of Alejandro's lieutenants, the bribes, the laundering routes, each sentence to erase a year of Alejandro's freedom. The jury took less than 5 hours to return the verdict. Guilty. The judge's voice echoed, cold and matter-of-fact. Alejandro Cruz, you are hereby sentenced to 35 years in federal custody without the possibility of parole. He didn't react. The man who once broke cartels with whispers, who had made enemies disappear with silence, simply bowed his head and nodded, as if the outcome had always been inevitable. Federal courtrooms, Alejandro decided, were colder than prison cells. He was transferred to a medium security facility 2 states away, where reputation mattered less than currency, and alliances were forged in steel and blood. His first week inside was uneventful. No threats, no welcomes, just observation. Alejandro adapted. He spoke little, observed everything: guards, schedules, black market exchanges, a fight in the yard that wasn't about respect, but about control of the kitchens. He noted it all. He wasn't the man who stepped off the Greyhound all those years ago, but he remembered what it felt like to start from zero, from nothing. In time, whispers reached him. Former lieutenants scattered by the collapse were locked up in nearby wings. Some still held loyalty, others had rebuilt small pieces of the fallen empire. Alejandro reached out, carefully. Coded notes in library books, messages relayed through chapel conversations. A few responded. He earned their trust not with threats or boasts, but with strategy, insight, familiarity. He mapped the network in the shadow once more, this time within the walls. Beyond the fences, he still had allies. Not many, but enough. A cousin in the Dominican Republic who moved product through port cities, a contact in Madrid who dealt in crypto laundering, a financier in Bogota who remembered an old favor. And quietly, Alejandro began pulling strings again. He didn't rage at his fate. He didn't cry for revenge. He planned. Late at night, lying on the stiff cot of his cell, he'd stare at the ceiling and replay every mistake. Every moment he let trust outpace caution. Every time he believed loyalty was permanent. He had forgotten the one truth that once guided him through the streets. Every man is a variable, and every loyalty must be earned again and again. But that was behind him now. Alejandro Cruz had fallen. The king was in chains, but the empire, it lived in whispers, in favors, in the shifting shadow of power. And in the darkness of his cell, Alejandro smiled, because he knew better than anyone. Kings might fall, but empires, they evolve. Time passed like a slow burning fuse. Alejandro, once a silent king of Miami's underworld, became something different behind bars. He no longer commanded streets, ports, or politicians, but within the prison walls, he was a quiet force. He never raised his voice, never picked sides in petty gang conflicts, yet when violence threatened to explode, the question always came, what does Cruz say? He didn't lead with fear, he led with logic, fairness, precision. New inmates saw his guidance. Guards learned to ignore the harmless-looking books passed between hands. Books that contained coded messages, updated shipment schedules, even restructured debt arrangements. On the outside, Alejandro funneled contraband with surgical cleanliness. He arbitrated disputes like a judge. By his 10th year inside, he wasn't just respected, he was revered. Then came the appeal. Buried deep in the system was a man Alejandro had once rescued from disgrace. The junior judge whose gambling debts were paid off with no signature and no strings. The same man was now seated on the federal appellate bench. Through a string of intermediaries and just enough legal nuance, Alejandro's case re-emerged with an insidious headline: chain of custody violation discovered in key evidence. A small error, a procedural slip, but in a federal conviction, it was enough. Months passed, documents were reviewed, testimonies questioned, and one great morning, Alejandro Cruz stepped through the gates of Black Ridge Correctional Facility, flanked by no one, no cameras, no press, no welcoming committee, just him and freedom. He wasn't exonerated, he wasn't pardoned, but he was out. Miami had changed. New buildings, new players, new slang whispered on streets he used to control. The old Riviera and Lombardo names were relics now. The cartel footholds had shifted. Smaller, smarter outfits ran digital fraud rings, human trafficking routes, crypto laundering. Alejandro watched from the shadows, unimpressed. The rules were the same, only the toys had changed. He didn't rebuild immediately. He watched, listened, relearned the game. The city had become faster, noisier, more paranoid. Good, because Alejandro had changed too. He no longer trusted loyalty without price, no longer mistook fear for obedience. He tested everyone, made them earn their place. He never kept lieutenants for long, trusted no inner circle, held no delusions of permanence. His comeback was surgical, quiet buyouts, blackmail leverage with precision, politicians' secrets bought not with cash, but with mercy. Former enemies, now bloated and careless, were reminded that Alejandro had once built an empire from nothing, and he had done it without spilling a single drop of his own blood. This time, there would be no missed signs, no blind spots. Every ally was expendable, every threat temporary. Power, he realized, wasn't about staying on top. It was about rising again, when everyone thinks you're buried for good. In a small cigar lounge, tucked behind a pawn shop, on Calle Ocho, Alejandro Cruz sat alone, eyes calm, posture regal, as a new recruit nervously approached. "Is it true what they say?" the boy asked. "That you lost everything?" Alejandro smiled faintly. "No," he said, lighting the cigar. "I just loaned it to history for a little while."